Did you hear the radio where Max Verstappen says, "I'm slow, I can't keep up with them"? That wasn't just frustration, it was a confession that exposes Red Bull's worst crisis in years. Is Red Bull experiencing the beginning of the end of its dominance? And what does this mean for Verstappen's future? Today we're going to analyze Verstappen's most powerful radio message after the 2025 British GP and what it reveals about the deepening crisis within Red Bull. To understand what's really going on with Max Verstappen and Red Bull, you have to look beyond the final result of the 2025 British Grand Prix. Because if you look solely at the table, it might seem like Max simply had a bad day. But the truth is that what happened at Silverstone wasn't an isolated stumble. It was confirmation that something profound is wrong within the team that until recently dominated every weekend with authority. The context behind that race changes everything. Verstappen began the weekend demonstrating what he has been for years, a world-class driver capable of pushing any car to the limit. He achieved a brilliant pole position, beating Piastri by just over a tenth. On a circuit as demanding as Silverstone, where qualifying becomes an art of milliseconds, Max showed that his talent is still intact. It was no coincidence. It was a near-perfect lap with a car that, at least on Saturday, seemed to have what it took to compete. That result gave the impression that Red Bull could still react. That the RB21, with all its problems, could at least fight for victory. But what came on Sunday was a brutal reality check. Everything that had worked in the dry disappeared with the arrival of rain. And it wasn't heavy rain. It was the kind of treacherous conditions that separate well-balanced cars from those that rely on an extreme setup to perform. Red Bull had opted for a low downforce setup to maximize straight-line speed. A strategy that could pay off if the weather stayed dry. But that gamble became its greatest weakness when the track began to change. Max felt it immediately. In the opening stages after the safety car restart, he not only lost pace, but even spun, relegating him out of the direct fight. And then came that message. That radio signal no one expected to hear from a driver like him. He said clearly, "I can't even keep up with them, I'm slow." That sentence wasn't just a complaint. It was a momentary surrender from someone who understands what's happening with his car better than anyone. It was the voice of a driver whose car is failing him, not just in performance, but in consistency, confidence, and predictability. And this is where the seriousness of the matter begins to be felt. Because we're not talking about a bad strategy, or an error on the track, or even a failed pit stop. We're talking about a car that stops working as soon as an external variable changes. In this case, the rain. The RB21 went from being competitive in the dry to uncontrollable in the wet. And that says much more about the car's structure than the track conditions. Meanwhile, McLaren and Ferrari, the new benchmarks, were able to adapt. Their cars remained stable, fast, and competitive no matter what the weather did. The contrast was painful. Max, from inside the cockpit, experienced it lap after lap, watching how rivals who were far behind him a year ago were now simply pulling away from him without him being able to do anything to respond. And that feeling of helplessness isn't something we're interpreting. It's there, etched in his tone of voice, in his body language, in his post-race statements. The same Max who a year ago spoke of perfection, of details, of total control, today declares that we're not fighting for the championship, so, well, it doesn't matter that much. That, coming from him, weighs heavily. It weighs heavily. This initial context makes something very clear. What we saw at Silverstone isn't an isolated mistake. It's the reflection of a dangerous trend. Red Bull has lost technical ground and is paying for it on the track. Max knows it. And for the first time in a long time, he admits it openly. Not because he wants to stir up drama, but because he can no longer hide it. The decline is evident, and it's not in his hands to reverse it from behind the wheel alone. Red Bull's current position and how it's handling the situation, both technically and emotionally. Because it's one thing to have a bad weekend, and quite another to not know how to fix it. What we saw at Silverstone wasn't just a tactical defeat or a strategic error. It was a sign that Red Bull is losing control of its narrative. Not only did they fail to react to the changing weather conditions, but their technical decisions backfired. Setting up the car with such low downforce was a very risky gamble. And when that gamble failed, there was no plan B. From the pit wall, the responses were cold, almost automatic. And on the other side, in the cockpit, Max was beginning to lose patience. The exchange of messages with his trusted engineer, Giampiero Lambiase, was much more tense than usual. Where before there had been collaboration and focus, now there was suppressed frustration, awkward silences, and incomplete sentences that revealed a deep emotional strain. After the race, the message was even clearer. Verstappen stated bluntly that they are not fighting for the championship. He said that, given the circumstances, it doesn't matter that much. For a driver of his caliber, accustomed to racing until the last corner, that phrase is not a simple comment. It's a sign of resignation. And when the leader starts to sound resigned, the entire team feels it. Helmut Marko, a key advisor at Red Bull, admitted it coolly, "Our operating window is extremely small." Simply put, that means the car only performs well under very specific conditions. And in Formula One, that is synonymous with vulnerability. It's like having a powerful weapon that only works on certain terrains. When the track, the temperature, or the weather changes, performance plummets. And that's exactly what Max experienced at Silverstone. The situation worsens when we analyze the internal dynamics. Although Christian Horner and the engineers publicly try to remain calm, it's clear that there is no immediate solution in sight. The updates brought to Silverstone were significant in theory, but on the track they made no real difference. The car still doesn't offer confidence in variable conditions. It's still unpredictable. And for a driver who bases his performance on absolute control, that's a nightmare. For its part, Red Bull is at a crossroads. They need to improve the car, yes, but they also need to regain the emotional connection with their star driver. Because when that connection is broken, there's no going back. They know it. They've been there before. And if they don't act quickly, they could be repeating history. In short, Red Bull's position today is fragile. Technically, they're behind McLaren and Ferrari, and emotionally, they're starting to lose their leader. Meanwhile, Max Verstappen faces a decision he never thought he'd have to make so soon. Continue fighting with a team that no longer dominates, or start looking for a new home where he can. What lies ahead for Red Bull and Max Verstappen isn't just a technical challenge. It's a test of survival. It's not just about regaining pace on the track. It's about rebuilding a structure that is showing clear signs of fatigue, both in terms of performance and in the relationship between driver and team. The near future will be a battlefield where every decision could mean the beginning of a recovery or the beginning of the end. In the upcoming races, Red Bull has two fronts to contend with. On the one hand, they must continue developing a car that is clearly behind its direct rivals. McLaren and Ferrari have found a technical stability that allows them to be competitive in any conditions. Meanwhile, the RB21 remains trapped in such a narrow operating window that every detail out of control makes it an unpredictable car. And that, in today's Formula One, is unacceptable for a team that aspires to win titles. While Red Bull seeks to improve the car, the Grands Prix continue to score points, and the opportunities to make up ground are diminishing. The calendar moves on, and with each race in which the car doesn't perform, the pressure mounts on everyone in Milton Keynes. But that's only one side of the problem. The other is even more delicate, Max Verstappen's emotional and contractual management. Because what we saw at Silverstone wasn't just hot-headed frustration. It was a breaking point. Max isn't one to throw out messages without meaning to. If he says they're not fighting for the championship, he's not doing it to sound dramatic. He does it because he knows it's true, and also because he wants the team to listen, understand, and react. Something is starting to change in his speech. He no longer talks about us as he did before. His statements are increasingly individual, more distant, more resigned, and that, in a driver like him, is dangerous. Because Verstappen is a pure competitor. If he feels he's wasting his time, he won't stay just out of loyalty. And that's precisely what's starting to circulate in the paddock corridors. Therefore, what happens in the next 5 or 6 races will be crucial. If Red Bull manages to make a technical leap, even a partial one, and Max feels competitive again, the waters may calm. But if the performance remains inconsistent, or if frustration grows, the environment will become increasingly toxic. Furthermore, there's another factor that few are considering: internal confidence. Because if Max begins to see that there are no longer any real solutions within the team, something even more critical can happen. He can stop believing. And when a driver loses faith in his car and those who develop it, there's no strategy or motivation that can hold him back. And that, in an environment as competitive as F1, can be the beginning of an exit. The most intriguing thing about all this is that the situation has no clear path. There's no single likely scenario. Everything depends on how the car's performance evolves, whether the updates work, how the relationship with the driver is managed, and also how rivals react. The 2025 championship is no longer just being decided on the court. It's also beginning to be played out in the offices, in negotiations, and behind the microphones. What happened to Max Verstappen at the 2025 British Grand Prix wasn't simply a poor result or an isolated strategy error. It was a moment of rupture. The radio message in which he bluntly admits he can't keep up with his rivals represents much more than frustration. It is direct evidence that the bond between driver and car is broken. And when a driver like Verstappen, accustomed to dominating with authority, begins to doubt his car, the impact is not limited to a single race. It is a powerful signal that Red Bull's technical project is in crisis, and that even the most competitive driver on the grid is beginning to lose faith. Red Bull's current situation cannot be underestimated. The car has structural limitations that go beyond simple tuning. The operating window is so narrow that it only performs in ideal conditions, something impossible to guarantee over the course of a season. Furthermore, the failure to adapt to changing situations like the rain at Silverstone exposed a vulnerability that until recently we didn't associate with a team like Red Bull. And the most worrying thing is that solutions aren't coming with the urgency the situation demands. The improvements implemented so far have been minimal, and Max knows this better than anyone. At this point, nothing is guaranteed. Everything is open. Max Verstappen could stay and lead a rebuild if the team gives him reason to believe. Now I want to know what you think. Do you think Verstappen should stay at Red Bull and fight to turn things around? Leave me your opinion in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel.